All right, so we're going to finish lecture 3. This is part 2 of lecture 3. The vision continues here. I emerged and stood upon the other bank of the stream. I was filled with a new strength, and about me played flames of white light. So the first thing we can notice is that the flame has changed color, where it was the sort of impassioned fire of human ancestry associated with the snake, this red fire. It's now white, which I associate with the otherworldly or the supernatural. And the vision continues. I walked into a dark jungle. The trees parted to let me pass, and many wild animals followed behind me. So this new otherworldly understanding moves Morgan deeper into the recesses of nature. She and nature are now in a supernatural relationship. The trees are not sort of unmovable obstacles, but she's in a symbiotic relationship with them, and they part for her. You think of the Red Sea. At the same time, the wild animal instincts fall behind her, and they are tamed. So she's attained this supernatural relationship with nature, having deconstructed the ancestral forms between her and her innermost self, right? The crumbling of the Christian house. Vision continues. When I emerged from the jungle, I saw the entrance of a Mithraic cave. So to understand the meaning of the Mithraic cave, at least in the context of Jung, we can notice collected work 9.2, devoted to the Mithraic god Aeon. Aeon is the god of eternity, which Jung, at least in one sense, posits in the place of Christ. So 9.2 suggests that the Christian religion is one-sided, and I think you can trace this idea in Jung that God must be immanent to be justified, right? That's what he's trying to do, is immanentize God. He says that the transcendent life is a life that is sustained through death and rebirth. It's what's revealed to have, quote, perpetual continuation of life through transformation and renewal. So whatever the thing is that survives birth and death. Of course, that's what Christ is supposed to be, but let's just keep going. So Ion, the god of eternity and not Christ, who he thinks is the god of the highest good, is that symbol of transcendent life. So we might think that there are reasons to believe that Christ is an insufficient symbol for transcendence because it's only the good. So the idea that only the good survives death and rebirth, that is what Jung is reacting against. He's saying maybe there's something transcendent that's not just good that survives death and rebirth. So here in the visions, the visioner is looking for that religion which has a symbol of the transcendent life rather than vicissitudes which reveal it. So something beyond vicissitudes and contingencies of existence. All right, so the vision continues. I entered and beheld the communicants who had just killed the bull. They prayed in a loud voice while they dipped their hands in the blood. Give us of your blood, O bull, that we also may live. And then the visioner says to them, your faces are encrusted with blood. You are too heavy with the blood of the bull. Okay, so now the visioner reacts to the Mithraic sacrifice. It's an ambiguous image at once representing sacrifice and totality. So the visioner is impatient with the notion of sacrifice, as are many in the West who have found sacrifice co-opted for the purpose of control, right? So we think of the church. So the idea is that she's sort of over sacrifice. So how often are the dictates of dogma, this is what we might think her saying, used to undermine free thought, right? She's trying to move away from that. She finds distasteful the obsession with sacrifice and the heaviness of the blood. So even going backwards in time from the Christian highest good to a Mithraic or sort of dualist understanding of transcendence, she's still sort of grossed out by this idea of sacrifice. So the vision continues. When I had spoken, all the communicants arose and followed me. We peered together into the temples of Rome and Greece and Egypt, but they were all deserted. So she's going backwards. At length I led them to the shores of the sea, and they asked me, why have you led us here? We behold nothing. Then they all went away, and I was left standing alone. So while it may be true that the Mithraic symbolism captures something more basic in the transcendental life, this dualism, the visioner is still not content with it, and seeks to go deeper into the history of the collective unconscious to find a more enduring and suitable expression. In this regression, she loses her companions, we might think of aspects of her own psyche, who find little value in it, so she's alone. She's again alone psychologically. But perhaps this is the goal of the regression, to abandon the collective consciousness and tradition to be alone with the collective unconscious. Okay, so the vision continues. I gazed for a long time at the waters. At last the waters parted, and from them arose a woman crowned with light. In her hand she held something which she lifted towards the sky. So her solitude is arduous, but it's rewarded. She sees emerging from the water of the collective unconscious this unmistakable image of divinity. But of what divinity is it an image? This is what they ask. Is it the self? Is it the feminine self? Is it some weird anima mirror image thing? Would this image have been different if the visionary were a man? Well, it's an image of the woman in the water and the feminine principle that appears even deeper than and extinguishes the aggression of the bull. So this is what I'm suggesting is it's compensating for the aggressive bull and the need to sacrifice the aggressive bull. The idea is there's a symbol of totality that is not in this sort of tension. And so the question is, how universal is this symbol across the genders? Is there a possibility it's across the genders? So Von Franz writes in her commentary on Aurora Consurgens, this is sort of a thing that I'm trying to add in here because Jung doesn't go into this. Of course, Aurora Consurgens is important in Collective Work 14, but let me just pull it in here for help. So she writes, quote, psychologically, the wisdom of God is not the personal aspect of the man's anima, right? It's not his soul. We're not talking about gender, but an archetypal anima figure, an archetypal feminine soul figure, the feminine aspect of the God image. So I would suggest that this image is the personification of the wisdom of God, which, I mean, if we want to amplify this more, was treated in theological detail by the Russian sociologists in the 20th century. So the idea is we don't need to make any sex or gender distinctions. This feminine principle can be associated with a non-gendered, that is, universally applicable sort of theory of God. So the wisdom in the sociologists is the very substance of God and the personification of the created world. So it's the inferior function. It's inferior because it's a kind of understanding which is non-competitive and non-conquering. It's the thing we've repressed. It's also related to the problem of participation mystique, which is the confusion over the cause of pain and suffering. This symbol is a symbol of the eternal person that undergoes pain and suffering, right? As creation as pain and suffering, right? As much as pleasure and enjoyment, without an imperial attitude, but an attitude of acceptance and differentiation. So we're seeing here a form that's comparable to the Christ image, in that it's the nature of pain and suffering. But it's something that is lower than, older than, more fundamental than the sort of Christ, the complex of Christ, sort of comes out of existence and satisfies a need originating in this feminine totality. So after the creation of the world in this substance, so the sociologists think that, if you read Bulgakov, for example, Sophia, divine wisdom, is the substance of God. So you hear in Christian dogma the idea of homoousia, or the three persons have a single shared substance. He suggests that Sophia is that substance. And so when God created the world, the first thing that you do, right, it may be created through the Logos, but the actual creation sits in this sort of relationship between divine and created ousia, divine and created substance, which is divine and created Sophia, this feminine principle of creativity. And then the idea would be that the Logos, which is the structure given to the substance of creation, only emerges in consciousness of human beings much later. So we've always been participating in the substance of God, and the structure of that substance is the Logos. But only later does Christ kind of come out as the person, right? It takes 2,000 years. I don't know how long in human history. How long were human beings alive before Christ was revealed, right? And we think of the revelation of Christ as an understanding of the structure of reality. And then we're getting to something more basic here. That's the idea. Okay, so perhaps most importantly, Sophia is an attitude that accepts but does not take responsibility for having been conquered. So this is the nature of the substance, which is not yet overlaid by Christ. The former of which, acceptance, is impossible under the premise of inferiority. Right, so the premise of inferiority would be that the substance of God is not as good as the structure of creation. The substance of creation is not as good as the structure of creation. Right? So that losing is unacceptable. The idea that evolutionarily, right, if we think that evolution defines values, survival is the highest value. The idea is there is a substance which is indifferent to these evolutionary values. The latter of which, responsibility, is impossible under participation mystique. Okay, so the idea is that losing, in an evolutionary sense, is not something for which you are responsible, except and unless you're under participation mystique, which is the idea that there's something normative in losing. And so, anyway, I'm going to leave it there.